In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion. Thanks for joining me on today's show. Today's topic: why the criticism of Christian colleges and universities? If I were to say what topic gets the most communication from you all via text, phone calls, emails, Facebook messaging, and whatnot, it would be this issue. I listened to you recently on a podcast. You were on Elisa Childers' podcast recently where you were talking about Biola University and you're very concerned about them. Why? Why are you concerned? Is it as bad as you're suggesting? And if it is, please show us some receipts, some specific examples. And are there other universities that are equally bad, equally guilty of doing similar things? Can you tell us which universities and colleges those are? And of the handful you recommend, can you tell us what those schools' names are again? That's today's show. I'm going to be less circumspect than I have in the past. I've tried very hard not to be Bush League or not to throw anybody under the bus. So I've usually been a little bit circumspect when I talk about these schools. And I'll say, well, a school in the Northwest or a school in the Midwest or a non-denominational school or a school that aligns with the Holiness Church, the Free Methodists, the Nazarene, or the Wesleyans. I'll say things like that, and I kind of leave you guessing as to which school I'm talking about. The only reason I've done that is I just thought maybe we could accomplish this critique and hopefully correction of Christian colleges and universities without being more specific as to which schools I was talking about and even given names of presidents and faculty and whatnot at those schools. Today I'm going to take the gloves off a bit and I'm going to be more blunt. I am going to give you some receipts. I'm going to give you names. I'm going to identify given colleges and universities that I think are in grave error and why. And I may even mention names as to people who have promoted these grave errors and why I think they're desperately wrong. So that's today's show. So by the end of the show, you'll know a few things. You'll know why I'm critical of my own industry, why I think Christian colleges and universities are guilty of causing a lot of the problems that we suffer today in the church and in our culture. I think Christian colleges and universities have dropped the ball, and I think they should be ashamed of what they've done. Our job is to be salt and light to a culture that's dark and rotting. And rather than doing that, preparing students to be stronger in their faith, to understand their faith more rigorously and be able to defend it in the market square of ideas, we're producing a bunch of students that are deconstructing. We're producing a bunch of students that don't understand a basic biblical worldview and in fact are critical of it rather than embracing it. We're producing a bunch of graduates that don't even understand why the LGBTQIA narrative and nomenclature and agenda is bad and wrong and sinful. We're creating a graduate base, an alumni base of people that don't understand why you probably don't want to align yourself with a neo-Marxist movement that says in its bylaws that it wants to, quote, queer the nuclear family, close quote. That's Black Lives Matter, by the way. We probably don't want to hire diversity, equity, and inclusion officers because by definition, they're going to focus on reverse racism because that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion as an agenda, as a model, as an ideology does. We probably don't want to embrace the neo-Marxist critical theory, critical race theory, et cetera. And why are we hiring faculty that embrace this? So these are things that I'm going to talk about today. It's going to be a little bit longer show because I'm going to share details with you. So stick with me. If you want to know what's going on in Christian education, more specifically the colleges and universities, and even more specifically than that, the colleges and universities that are members of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, the CCCU. That is the umbrella organization that almost all of these institutions belong to and pay pretty hefty dues to, in the thousands and thousands of dollars per year to be a member of the CCCU. I'm going to share details as to my relationship with the CCCU, why I think that they were in great error, and why I pulled my university out of that organization when I was the president there. And to my knowledge, the CCCU has not changed course. They have not righted the ship. In fact, since I withdrew some, 9, 10 years ago, I think they've implemented some policies that are even worse than existed when I was still a member. So we're going to talk about this stuff. Before we do, a couple of housekeeping matters. Remember that we're sponsored by Equipping the Persecuted, equippingthepersecuted.org. If you want to help Nigerian Christians who are being persecuted for their faith, their churches are being burned down, their villages are being decimated, entire communities are just disappearing, children are being stolen and taken off into slavery, wives are losing their husbands because they're martyred. In some cases, children are orphaned because both the mother and the father have been killed. If you want to provide food and medical supplies, if you want to fund hospitals and orphanages and schools, then go to equippingthepersecuted.org and make a tax-deductible gift today. That's equippingthepersecuted.org. One more thing. Remember this, please. Please subscribe to The Rebellion. I don't mention that often enough on my podcasts. Maybe it's a Freudian slip that I don't want to be guilty of too much self-promotion, telling you that you need to promote this. But I'm going to tell you to do that today. Promote this podcast if you like what I say today, or if you think it's interesting and challenging, please promote it. How do you do that? Put it out on Facebook, put it on Twitter, post it on Instagram, whatever social media you use. Please post it out there and tell your friends to consider watching it. And then if you enjoy it, and if you watch The Rebellion periodically, please subscribe. Subscribe to The Rebellion. That helps our algorithms, and that helps us move up in the ranks. So go subscribe today. It doesn't cost you any money. Just click subscribe. Give us a 5-star review, please. And then also push it out in your social media. Tell everybody else that you know that they need to be watching and listening to The Rebellion, that we've got some interesting and challenging things to say. So, context. This past week, Elisa Childers, if you don't follow Elisa, you need to. She's excellent. She's very sharp. She's very bright. She's incredibly well read. She's patient and she's kind, but she's also forthright. And she will call a spade as graciously as she can, but she's not going to straddle the fence. She understands deconstructions. She understands the challenges that many young people are going through today in terms of questioning their faith. And I would argue a lot of people are questioning their faith. It goes back to the colleges and universities, the education that they received. Their education made them weaker in their faith rather than stronger in their faith. And that's what I was talking to Elisa about recently when I was blessed to be one of her guests on a podcast earlier this week. She set the context for the podcast by sharing her concerns about one Christian college in particular, and that's Biola University. I'm going to read her statement so you understand what her concerns are, and I'm going to tell you right now, I agree with her concerns 100%. In fact, when she posted this, I told her privately, stay the course, don't back down. You're over the target, you're going to take fire, probably from some friends, and you don't want to back down because what you're concerned about is legitimate and real. And we need leaders that are willing to shine a light in this darkness. One of the concerns she had about Biola is a recent chapel speaker. Chapel speaker actually has a book out, and in the book, this chapel speaker actually has a prayer. And that prayer is in print. Elisa has posted it. That prayer is in print, and it starts out with, Dear God, help me to hate white people. I'm not kidding you. A chapel speaker at Biola University, a Christian university out in greater Los Angeles area in Southern California, has speakers in its chapel that pray to God to help them start hating white people. Now, why in the world would any Christian college platform such a speaker? I never would have. And I don't hesitate at all to say any Christian college that does deserves your critique, your serious questions as to why in the world you would trust that school with your son or daughter's heart, mind, and soul. And let me tell you this, it's always just the tip of the iceberg. What you stumble across, like this one chapel speaker, it's always just the tip of the iceberg. You didn't stumble across the only incident that's like this. There's always more. And if it's being spoken of in chapel, I can guarantee you there are faculty who are teaching it in the classroom. Because this chapel speaker was invited for some reason. She was vetted. She was approved. Somebody wanted her there. And she is promoting DEI and critical theory to such an extreme level that she's actually praying to God to help her start hating white people. And she's not afraid to say it, to print it and publish it in one of her books. That's one thing that Elisa rightfully is concerned about with regard to Biola University. And somebody asked me, well, who approves these chapel speakers? Well, I can tell you the buck always stops at the president's desk. I never would have had a chapel roster without it being reviewed by me and being approved by me. Now, did somebody sneak through periodically that I didn't know enough about and I approved them? Perhaps that's the case. But I can tell you this, if anybody ever snuck into our chapel services and spoke like this, I would take responsibility for correcting it immediately. I would take the podium and I would say, we do not agree with this here. This is not what we teach. This is not biblical. This is not what we should be talking about in terms of right behavior, right attitudes, right words within the body of Christ. I would take responsibility for correcting that within seconds after it was stated. And I would do everything in my power, and I would consider it my job to vet such speakers and the chapel roster to assure that those people that are speaking in our chapel agree with the mission of my university, the biblical mission of my university. So the buck always stops at the president's desk. Excuse me. I'm going to read to you what Elisa said that set a few people off, okay? She said this, in a recent podcast, I stated that I can't recommend parents send their students to Biola University. Many people wrote in to ask me to explain why. Well, here's a start, she says. I'm still quoting from her. First, Biola's statement on sexuality, linked in comments, she says in her post, states this, and this is a direct quote from Biola University's student handbook or its policies printed otherwise. I assume this is a student handbook. It says, students desiring to live in Biola-owned housing will be placed based on their sex at birth. However, as issues connected to sexuality and gender are complex and layered, we will walk with students on an individual basis who identify as transgender or experience dissonance with their biological sex and gender in order to provide helpful support to arrive at decisions around facility use and to offer appropriate accountability. We also ask that transgender individuals refrain from the process of medical transition during their time at Biola. Close quote. That's in their student handbook. Now, if you don't see something wrong with that, you haven't been listening to me and you haven't been listening to Elisa Childers, you haven't been listening to Rosaria Butterfield, you haven't been listening to Christopher Ewan, you haven't been listening to a host of individuals and people who are saying, wait a second, there's nothing in the Bible that talks about sex and gender being two different things. This is a bifurcated identity that is constructed in a postmodern way, and it is separating us from the biblical definition of who we are as human beings. It is very clear in the Bible that God created us imago Dei, in his image. Male and female, he created them. That's it, period. There's only one kind of human being. It's the imago Dei, made in the image of God. Male and female, God created you, period. All of this talk about transgender, LGBTQ identity, hyphenating your identity by virtue of your greatest temptations or your greatest sins is unbiblical. And buying into these labels is not something any church or college should do if they wave the banner of Christ. Period. Full stop. All of this language in Biola's handbook, student handbook, should tell you immediately, this is not a place for my kid, because they've already imbibed the Kool-Aid to such an extreme degree that they're printing it in their student handbook that if you want to get involved in student housing at Biola University, you will be placed based on sex at birth. Why not just say you've got male and female dormitories, and men stay in the male dormitory and females stay in the female dormitory? Why are you getting into all of this convoluted language of assigned at birth, sex assigned at birth? And then they go on, however, as issues connected to sexuality and gender are complex and layered. Why? Why are they complex and layered? Because you're making them that way. You've allowed culture to confuse the situation. There's clarity in the Bible. The biblical worldview is clear on sex, male and female. It's also clear on how you're to behave, okay, if you're going to be walking with God. It's very clear. There's no confusion on this. Again, we will walk with students on an individual basis who identify as transgender. Again, identify as transgender. Why are they enabling that dysfunctional way of thinking? Or experience dissonance with their biological sex and gender in order to provide helpful support to arrive at decisions around facility use. It seems awfully nebulous, right? What are you talking about? Are you going to allow a biological man to live in a female dorm? Arrive at decisions with regard to facility use? Bathrooms? Showers? Again, this is not a good statement. We also ask that transgender individuals refrain from the process of medical transition during their time at Biola. There is no such thing as a transgender individual. There are men and women, and some people have temptations to get involved in certain things that they shouldn't get involved in. Period. Stop enabling people to hyphenate their identity by their favored temptations or sins. Stop. Rosaria Butterfield has rightfully confronted all of this nonsense. I encourage you to read her book. I encourage you to read more of Elisa Childers. I encourage you to read Christopher Ewan's material on this issue. Stop hyphenating your identity. Let's see. Elisa goes on and talks about a couple chapel speakers that have been there. One is Rich Villodas, or Viodas. I don't know for sure how you pronounce his last name. Villodas. He's speaking on spiritual formation. And this guy literally praised Richard Rohr, who is a heretic. He's denying the essentials of the gospel, the essentials of the deity of Jesus Christ. He's a universalist. He doesn't believe in the exclusivity of the gospel message. There are multiple ways that we could define Richard Rohr, but one of them that you can't define him as is biblically orthodox. And Biola is featuring a chapel speaker who says this about Richard Rohr. He is a person, a writer I really respect, and he may have made some problematic statements, but I really respect him. Well, I'm sorry. You can't respect heresy, and you shouldn't be platforming it at a Christian institution. The same speaker, Richard Villodas, says that Charlie Kirk is a problem. He's passionate about Jesus Christ, he says, but then he goes on to write, I've also seen videos of him using words that have caused great harm to the black and brown people, to Muslims, and to LGBTQ people. Again, this speaker in chapel is buying the lie of LGBTQ nomenclature and labels and identity, and no Christian college should be platforming a person who is in that world of thinking. And I'm sorry, it's not true that Charlie Kirk has said things that are wrong or racist or bigoted toward black and brown people or to Muslims. It's just not true. So that's what Elisa is concerned about. And she's absolutely right. She should be concerned. And so should you. Now, some of the faculty or staff or administration or alumni of Biola will say, well, this is being exaggerated. It is not being exaggerated. These are quotes directly from the student handbook, and these are quotes from chapel speakers that have been featured at this institution. And like I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So here's what I want to tell you. Christian parents, don't assume that because a college has Christian in its name or in the four-color recruiting brochures that they're handing you, that the faculty and the leadership share your beliefs. In fact, it's very possible that they don't. And I'm going to share more examples with you. Candidly, I don't want my kids going to an institution that's platforming people that are praying to God that they hate white people. I don't want my kids going to an institution that has drank the Kool-Aid with regard to LGBTQ identity and transgenderism, and that they're going to walk through, in other words, enable you, have a conversation with you about something that you shouldn't do. No, stand in their way and tell them to stop. Don't give them a kumbaya group hug while they're on the precipice of doing things that could irreparably damage their body. Challenge them with biblical truth. Expose the lies of culture. Stop playing these silly games. So don't assume that because a college has Christian in its name, or that it puts it on its Facebook page or its website or the four-color brochures and all the stuff they're sending you from the admissions office, don't assume that the faculty and the leadership of that institution share your beliefs. It's very possible they don't. Here I'm going to share some specifics with you. Take, for example, Greenville College. I was the dean there, dean of students there a few years ago. Greenville College, shortly after I left to take a vice presidency at another institution, my alma mater up in Michigan, Greenville College started incorporating into its freshman orientation program M. Scott Peck's model of chaos. Now, what is M. Scott Peck's model of chaos? M. Scott Peck believed that you have to create chaos in an individual's life to the point where they break down, they totally deconstruct. And it's only after that chaos has taken place in their life, spiritually, emotionally, can they put the building blocks back together. So in other words, you have to blow up the building and then let the student start building, putting the blocks back on top of one another in a way that they see fit, so that they stop wearing the mask that was handed to them by their pastor and they start embracing the real faith that they construct themselves after this chaos implodes their confidence. Now, do you feel good about that? Do you want to send your kid to an institution that within the first few weeks of his experience there as an 18-year-old, the faculty and staff are working to create chaos in his life rather than confidence? Now, I understand fully that all of us have to own our faith. There is a time when all of us have to decide, is this my faith, or is it just a faith that's been given to me by my mom and dad and by my church? We all have to own our faith. But the way to come to that realization, the way to own it and have it be real and have it be yours rather than somebody else's, isn't to blow it all up and disregard everything that mom and dad have taught that kid for the first 18 years of his life. They've tried to train up a child in the way he should go so that when he is old, he will not depart. And then in the first few hours that they're on a Christian college campus, the faculty and staff are intentionally trying to create chaos in that kid's spiritual life rather than confidence. I don't respect it. It's not a good model. And Greenville College was doing that and doing it proudly. And then there's Indiana Wesleyan, where the president, just a couple years ago, just a handful of years ago, President David Wright, who's since retired, okay, he created a video of himself and he put it out on their website where he was extolling the virtues of Side B and LGBTQ students on his campus. Side B, most proponents of Side B believe that identifying as a homosexual or lesbian or trans or queer is fine. That identity is fine as long as you are celibate and you comply with the biblical prohibitions to given sexual behaviors. Now, I agree with complying with the biblical prohibitions to sexual sin, but I don't agree that you hyphenate your identity, LGBTQIA plus whatever, by that sin. And David Wright and Indiana Wesleyan explicitly put out a video talking about how they had an open and welcoming and loving and affirming environment for their LGBTQ students at Indiana Wesleyan University. It's a fact. It's out there. And there's Houghton College's president, since retired, Shirley Mullen. She did essentially the same thing at the exact same time, talking about the gay Christians on their campus, the LGBTQ Christians and community on the Houghton College campus. Again, side B, they didn't jump the shark and start promoting or enabling the behavior. But here's what I'm telling you. Once you accept the identity sooner or later, and it's going to be sooner in most cases, you're going to start excusing the behavior. Because if you're going to grant identity to somebody and say that's their minority status, that's who they are, what gives you the right to tell them that they can't behave accordingly? They're going to make that argument. Faculty are going to make that argument. Chapel speakers are going to make that argument, and the institution will capitulate. It will fold. Here's another one. A Nazarene church school, Northwest Nazarene University, up in Napa, Idaho. They, for decades, retained a tenured professor by the name of Thomas Ord, who is gay affirming, LGBTQ affirming, and he's the religion professor at Northwest Naz. What do you think the graduates of that department are going to do when they go into seminary and then become pastors in the Nazarene church? Well, I can tell you what they're going to do, because you have a person by the name of Andy McGee, an ordained Nazarene pastor who started a ministry that was sanctioned by the Nazarene church called LGBTQ Love Wins. And Andy McGee, the director of this program, said on his website for this particular ministry that he was a bisexual Christian. Again, this is coming out of the Nazarene colleges, the Wesleyan colleges such as Indiana Wesleyan, Houghton College, and I'm going to go on. Okay? During the Black Lives Matter riots, school after school fell over themselves to align with an organization that explicitly called for the queering of the nuclear family. I've already mentioned that, the queering of the nuclear family. That's in the BLM charter. All you had to do is spend 5 minutes, click on the website, open up their charter, read what they stand for, and a couple of the things that jumped out at you immediately should have been the queering of the nuclear family and the dismantling of patriarchy. This is what Black Lives Matter explicitly says. But yet we had school after school, dozens of Christian colleges across, if not hundreds, across the nation, falling over themselves to wave the BLM flag, to invite speakers on their campus that were sympathetic with BLM, a Marxist organization that believes in queering the nuclear family. And some of our Christian colleges even established George Floyd scholarships. I'm not kidding. And nearly all of the Christian colleges, at least ones in my circle, such as Houghton, Indiana Wesleyan, and the Free Methodist schools, the Nazarene schools, this was my circle. Almost all of them embrace the fairness for all doctrine, which officially codifies LGBTQ as a minority status. And again, I'll say it, I'll repeat myself. Once you grant legal minority status to a group of people, it is virtually going to be impossible for you to logically and legally tell them that they can't behave in accordance with the status you just granted them. I tried to say that over and over again. The Alliance Defending Freedom agrees with me. I tried to get Alliance Defending Freedom to speak at a Wesleyan convention where the fairness for all doctrine was being presented as the only option, the only good option for our colleges and universities and our churches to support. And I knew the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, did not agree with that. I tried to get ADF on the docket to speak, at least so there would be a balanced presentation, and I was refused. They wouldn't take ADF. They chose to promote fairness for all, which is opening up Pandora's box big time. Then there's Seattle Pacific University. I believe it was just last year. I may be off a few months, but I think it was just last year that 70%, over 70% of the faculty of Seattle Pacific University voted no confidence in the president and the board of trustees. This is a huge issue. For the faculty to vote no confidence in the president, that's a big deal. But to also include the board of trustees, that is almost never heard of. 70% of the faculty voted no confidence in the president and the board of trustees. Over what? Poor finances, poor financial management? No. The reason they voted no confidence is because the Board of Trustees and the president were adhering to the traditional view of human sexuality that still exists in print in the Free Methodist Church's discipline and doctrine. And 7 out of 10 of the faculty at Seattle Pacific University, a Free Methodist school, a school that's a member of the Council for Christian Colleges and University, a Christ-affirming institution, a Christian evangelical Christian liberal arts institution. 70% of the faculty vote no confidence in the board and the president because the board and the president simply believe in the biblical ethic of sexuality. One man, one woman, sex and marriage. That's it, period. Nope. 70% said, can't have that. No confidence. You want to send your kids to Seattle Pacific? Another example is Baylor. We've talked about Baylor before. They recently celebrated, just in the last 6 months, they celebrated a near $700,000 gift that they received from a foundation to create a more LGBTQ affirming atmosphere on their campus. Then we have Fuller Theological Seminary. Now, this is a graduate school. It's not an undergraduate school, but it's still aligned with all of these schools that I'm talking about right now. This goes back a few years. Fuller Theological Seminary. While I was speaking out in California, I picked up a newspaper, and there on bold print in the newspaper that I was reading was Fuller Theological Seminary announcing that they were proud to officially sanction their first LGBTQIA club on their campus. It was called One Table. That's the name of the club for their gay and lesbian students on the Fuller Theological Seminary campus. And the first event they had, the first event that this organization had that was officially sanctioned by the institution, they had this event in their chapel. It wasn't even in some neutral site. It was in their chapel. It was the movie Milk, which is a movie about Harvey Milk, the gay activist that has been granted sainthood in California with regard to his LGBTQ homosexual lifestyle and advocacy. Samford University, that's Samford, SAMFORD, part of the Christian Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. This CCCU institution that says I'm going to skip that one. I'm sorry. I'm going to skip the Samford one. Let's just go on to the CCCU. The CCCU is an organization that's comprised of Protestant and Catholic schools, and they allege to be committed to advance the cause of Christ-centered higher education, and to help our institutions transform lives by faithfully relating scholarship and service to biblical truth. I'm going to read that to you again. That is their mission: to advance the cause of Christ-centered higher education and to help our institutions transform lives by faithfully relating scholarship and service to biblical truth, close quote. Now, when I was a college president, we were a member of that organization because almost all of them are. There are some benefits to being a member. They have programs that they offer to member institutions that your students can participate in. Programs in Washington, D.C., programs in Europe, programs in other locations, Hollywood, for example. There are CCCU programs that are cooperatives that many smaller colleges couldn't afford those programs. So your students can avail themselves of these programs if you're a member of the CCCU. So there are some benefits to being a member, but it's not cheap, I can tell you that. The dues are pretty steep, thousands of dollars for these institutions, depending on the institution's size. So why do I have a problem? Why do I have a problem with the CCCU? Well, let me, I just noticed I have my notes on Samford University here. I thought I lost them. I'm gonna share these with you, okay? So Samford University, a member of the CCCU, and I've told you kind of what they are. They had some students on their campus tried to launch a local chapter of the Young Americans for Freedom, YAF. Have you heard of YAF? William F. Buckley Jr. founded it back in the 60s. It's a club for conservative intellectual engagement, a la William F. Buckley type engagement. They publish some excellent material, and they do a great job of allowing students to engage with the ideas of the day under the assumption that you're not just going to have a bias to the left. You're going to be able to talk about these things with thoughtful guest speakers who are conservative scholars. That's the Young Americans for Freedom. Well, Samford wanted to launch a chapter there of YAF, and the faculty leaders blocked their request, insisting that the group amend the inflammatory language, that's a quote, in the purpose statement of YAF, the original founding document of the group that dates back to the 1960s. And what was this horrific language that was in this document that the faculty said needed to be amended before they could ever allow YAF to have a chapter on Samford's campus, this Christian college's campus? The statement, again, written in the 60s under William F. Buckley Jr.'s guidance, denounces the evils of, wait for it, here it comes, denounces the evils of communism, calling for victory rather than coexistence with this menace. It actually says that in the charter and the mission statement for YAF. It cites the evils of communism, calling for victory rather than coexistence with it. And faculty thought this could offend certain students on their campus, so students were actually told by the faculty that they were not being kind to students with communist backgrounds. I am not kidding. They said this at Samford. Now, dare I point out the obvious here? It's a bit ironic that the members of the faculty of a Christian college and university would call for coexistence with communism in the first place, an ideology that calls for the eradication of religion. just a bit of irony here. This is the upside down world of these Christian colleges. All right, I'm going to go on a little bit further. I'm going to tell you the story of my dissertation at Michigan State University and why I chose my topic. I wrote my doctoral dissertation at Michigan State on the shifting meaning of the word evangelical in the modern Christian university. I knew that all these universities, like my alma mater, Spring Arbor University, and I worked at Grace College, I worked at Greenville College, obviously, I was vice president at Spring Arbor University. I was the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I was a member of the Wesleyan Education Council. I was the president of a couple different professional organizations within the CCCU. I was on committees, et cetera, very involved in my professional career within this world. And I knew that the definition of evangelical Christian, which all of these institutions used, was shifting, that the meaning was fuzzy. So I chose to make that my study at Michigan State University in my doctoral work. So I basically wanted to know, what do the words evangelical Christian mean to you when you apply those words to a university? And when I asked that question, I asked it of the faculty, the staff, the administration, the board, the pastors, the students, the parents, the church. I asked alumni, I asked these various different constituents, these stakeholders in these institutions, what do the words evangelical Christian mean to you when they're applied to a university? Pretty simple, right? Basically, truth in advertising. If you say you're an evangelical Christian university, are you being that in the minds of the consumers? When they buy your product, they think they're buying something. They think they're buying an evangelical Christian education. And what do they think that includes? That was pretty simple. That's all I was studying. So I had this situation that took place when I was a vice president at Spring Arbor University, my alma mater. I often spoke at new student orientation. And this particular year I did, and I welcome all the students, tell them what our institution is about, and I basically try to set the context for what it's going to be like to get a liberal arts degree that's grounded in Christ and grounded in Scripture and grounded in a biblical worldview. About a week after new student orientation, I had a young man, a freshman, walk into my office, and he was angry. And he looked at me and he almost wagged his finger at me, and he said, "You told me and you told my mom a week ago during new student orientation that this was a Christian university." And he paused, and I said, "Well, you're right, I did. What's the problem?" And he looked at me and he said this. He said, "Well, today I didn't know the answer to a question in my freshman English class. And the professor looked at me in front of all the rest of the students and confronted me because I didn't know the answer. And she said this, and I quote, "Jesus Christ, don't you know the answer to this question?" Close quote. And I was a little stunned and I thought, oh my. I said, well, you're right. That should never happen here. Why don't you go on? I'll take care of it. I'll call you up and let you know what the resolution is, as well as your mom. So as soon as he left my office, I called up the provost of Spring Arbor University. I was a vice president for student affairs. I called a provost who served on the cabinet with me. His name was Mark. And I said, Mark, we got a problem here. And I told him the story. This professor, English professor of ours, just confronted a student in class by using the Lord's name in vain. She said, Jesus Christ, don't you understand the answer to the question? And Mark responded and said, well, I get it. I understand your concern. I'll take care of it, make sure it doesn't happen anymore. But, Everett, you need to understand that some people of her denomination, of her church background, don't consider that to be cursing. Close quote. Now, here's my question to you. Why in the world are you hiring people that don't understand the bottom line expectation of not using the Lord's name in vain? Why are you hiring them as provosts to teach English at a Christian institution? Don't you think that at minimum the parents expect to get professors that don't use God's name in vain? Don't you think donors expect that? Would you think the church and pastors expect that? And apparently we've even got students that expect that because this kid's in my office complaining. But yet I've got a provost who's justifying it and trying to explain it and qualify it for me at a Christian institution. And do you think that's the only faculty member he hired that wasn't a mission fit? Didn't fit with your definition of evangelical Christian? Here's some other things. Here's some other things that I asked in my dissertation at Spring Arbor University. I asked the faculty, staff, and administration and board members to define what made a university an evangelical school. And one board member, a prominent board member, she'd been on the board for decades, very prominent name within the Free Methodist Church in that area in Michigan. One board member specifically rejected the idea that traditional evangelical Christianity prohibits premarital or extramarital sexual relationships. I kid you not. I basically asked her, I said, what do the words evangelical Christian mean to you in the context of a university when it comes to sexual behavior? She responded, I'm going to read her quote. I've searched forever and cannot find any psychological proof that sexual relationships outside of marriage are harmful. I don't think it's a non-issue, but I don't know if it's an issue we need to have a formal position on. Close quote. Now, she searched the scriptures. Forever. What scriptures are you reading? That you can't find anything that says that premarital, extramarital sexual relationships outside of marriage are harmful? Read the newspaper and you can see that they're harmful. Have you ever heard of sexually transmitted diseases? Have you ever heard of the problems that come with unplanned pregnancy out of wed pregnancies? Single parent moms or single parent households? Single moms trying to raise their children with no dad there? I mean, you can't find any evidence that this stuff is harmful? Read the newspaper, let alone your Bible. Oh, here's another one. I asked a faculty member at Spring Arbor University, what do the words evangelical Christian mean to you with regard to the virgin birth, the death, the resurrection, and the miracles of Jesus? And here was his answer. With a straight face, he looked at me and he said, those can be message statements. They don't need to be reality statements. Close quote. Christian University. So I've shared with you stuff from Indiana Wesleyan, Greenville College, Samford University. I've shared stuff from Houghton College, from Spring Arbor College, from Biola University. Now, this isn't a member of the CCCU, but it's Texas Christian University, where students that enrolled in a religion course at Texas Christian University are required to attend a Muslim mosque on Good Friday, no less. The course syllabus requires this of every student. When I was a student at Spring Arbor University, I enrolled in a program that they sponsored and promoted. I lived in Chicago for a semester, and one of the things that I was required to do as part of a class I took was attend a gay and lesbian church in Chicago, the Metropolitan Community Church. And this was back in the 1980s, folks. It hasn't gotten any better. At Indiana Wesleyan University on Valentine's Day in 2017, the university canceled all classes for a day to sponsor events promoting social justice, not biblical justice, social justice. They called it a day of courageous conversations, including sessions on, and I'm quoting, supporting even when we don't understand, and I'm quoting, racial injustice bus tour and a privilege walk. For each session attended, students were entered into a drawing for a $1,000 scholarship at Indiana Wesleyan University a few years ago, 2017. I could go on and on. The bottom line here, the point I'm making, Elisa Childers is spot on to shine the light on Biola University and what they're doing. But Biola University is not alone. Indiana Wesleyan, Houghton College, Greenville College, Spring Arbor College, the Nazarene schools. Schools can be Christian in name and heritage only. These schools might retain references to their faith in their name and in their official seals, or even in their bylaws, or even in their policy statements, like Seattle Pacific University. But in practice, they have openly left Orthodox Christianity behind and eagerly accommodated the secular liberal relativism that is the academic norm. How do I know that? When you have 70% of your faculty voting against orthodoxy, sexual orthodoxy, biblical clarity, you've left your Christian identity behind. These schools may be Christian in appearance, but not substance. These are perhaps the most pernicious universities. They say the right things, they put out the right advertising materials to parents and students. They talk about being faithful to Scripture. Some of them will even say they believe in inerrancy. But when you get there, their curriculum and their chapel is all loaded up with CRT, BLM, DEI, and hyphenated identity of LGBTQIA. Now, how can you be an institution that's grounded in inerrancy and be promoting that stuff? It calls into question what you mean by inerrancy and whether you're telling the truth to your customers when you say that's your stand. Again, they advertise themselves to parents and students as being faithful to Scripture and even a historic Christianity, yet they hire faculty on a routine basis who teach unbiblical and unchristian, anti-Christian doctrines to students. These colleges are quick to show parents their Bible curriculum, but reluctant to share the courses and the syllabus. They won't talk about what they teach in sociology. They won't talk about what they teach in psychology, and they won't talk about what their social work curriculum entails. They won't talk about their chapel program and share the roster, which will disclose that they've got people like Rachel Held Evans speaking at Greenville College, or these guys speaking at Biola University. Bart Campolo, Tony Campolo. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat in chapels and heard them speak at my alma mater. Let me be clear. When I was at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, I did my best to make sure that I vetted every faculty candidate and made sure that they believed in the inerrancy of Scripture, the objectivity of truth, that they believed marriage was defined by God and not the government, that they eschewed all of this hyphenated identity nonsense that dumbed down the definition of the human being to nothing but the sum total of what you're inclined to do. But I know for a fact that the other universities are not being that rigorous. And I think the proof's in the pudding. Look what their chapels entail, and look what their faculty are saying. Look at my research at Spring Arbor University. Some of these institutions are Christian in word only, but they don't practice what they preach. But then there are a handful of schools, and it's quite short. They're faithful Christian schools. And I try to keep up on this, but there may be more, and maybe some of them I'm going to cite right now aren't what I think they are. I remember when my son was getting ready to go to college, he narrowed it down to Biola or Asbury College. And I thought I would call up the uh, religion department and or the president's office of each institution and just ask the basic litmus test questions I tell my parents to ask. And that is, what's your view of scripture? What's your view of truth? What's your view of marriage? What's your view of sexuality? What's your view of CRT? What's your view of DEI? And then just shut up and listen. Don't fill the silence with your words. Make the president or the chair of the religion division answer the question. Do they believe in errancy? Do they believe in the objectivity of truth, that God, that truth is a revelation of God? It's not a construct of man. Do they believe that marriage is defined by God, not the government? Do they believe that life is defined by God and not you or me? Are they pro-life? Unapologetically so. Have they stood against the government on DEI and CRT, or have they embraced it? Have they bowed the knee to these calls from the Obama administration that sent letters to me and every other university president saying that you need to start providing transgender accommodations on your campus? How many of them sued the Obama administration and said, no, I did, but I don't know very many others that did? How many of them bought the lie of Shirley Hoekstra, who was the president of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, who called for a conversation over Obergefell and gay marriage and whether or not we should start admitting and hiring homosexual students as well as homosexual faculty, married homosexual faculty on our campuses? Goshen College and Eastern Mennonite University started doing that immediately the day after the Obergefell decision. And Shirley Hoekstra is sending us all notes saying, well, we need to have a conversation to see whether or not all of us want to do the same thing and whether you can continue to be a member in the CCCU if you do this. And as you know before, I've talked about it on the show. I responded to Dr. Hoekstra and I said, conversation about what? Show me in the Bible where we're supposed to have a conversation about our sin. We're supposed to confess it, not sit around and talk about it. No, I'm not going to have a conversation about something that is so clear in Scripture as a prohibition to sodomy, to homosexuality, lesbianism, and the transgender ideology that follows thereafter. No, we won't talk about it. We'll just say, no, it's not right, period, full stop. 30% of the presidents in the CCCU disagreed with me and said they were fine with what Goshen and Eastern Mennonite had done, and that was start hiring married homosexual faculty immediately. 30%, 3 out of 10 of the CCCU schools. And here's the thing, of the other 70%, only, at the time, maybe it's grown since, only 5 of us said, no, we're not going to continue to be part of an organization that goes this direction. Only 5 of us. And the rest of them just went along to get along. I even received a phone call from the president of Biola University, Barry Corey, trying to talk me off the ledge and trying to encourage me not to withdraw my institution from the CCCU over this issue. This is stuff that's going on, people. And this is why I'm critical. And this is why I say there are a handful. There are a handful left that are Christian in word and deed, and they haven't bought the lie. They're trying to stay the course. And I believe they're legitimate, but ask these questions. Don't take my word for it. Do your research, ask these questions. Cedarville in Ohio, College of the Ozarks in Missouri, New St. Andrews in Moscow, Idaho. I think Colorado Christian is solid, so I'm told. Arizona Christian seems to be doing good work with the Gallup organization and aligning themselves with them. I'd check out Arizona Christian, Colorado Christian. I would check out New St. Andrews. I really respect what they're doing. I would check out Liberty University. I think Liberty is still trying to stay the course. They're huge. It's very difficult to keep an organization that big under control, but I think they're trying. You get much beyond that, Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, I think they're doing a good job. You get much beyond that, and I'm not sure anymore, folks. And I think you're better off to ask very, very aggressive questions. Trust, I suppose, but verify. And I put the emphasis on verify when it comes to vetting. And I don't care whether it's your alma mater. I don't care if you're a graduate of Azusa or Westmont or Wheaton or Taylor or Biola or my alma mater, Spring Arbor University or Greenville, where I worked and was dean, Seattle Pacific University. I don't care. Roberts Wesleyan College. I don't care. Indiana Wesleyan, Houghton College. I don't care. Ask the questions. And if you don't get rock solid answers to all of this, then don't send your kids to those schools. You're wasting your money because wolves in sheep's clothing are dangerous. Okay? But wolves in shepherd's clothing are downright deadly. I would argue you're better off sending your kid to an institution where you know the wolves are the wolves and they don't even apologize for it or hide it. A Michigan State, an Ohio State, an Oklahoma State, a Kansas State, a University of Michigan, a University of Oklahoma. At least when you go to those schools, they're not pretending to be Christian. They're just not. But if you go to a Christian school where they pretend and then they celebrate deconstructing your kid's faith, creating chaos, breaking him down, hyphenating his identity, buying the lie of DEI and LGBTQIA and social emotional learning and CRT and all else that goes with it, embracing a neo-Marxist agenda more than a biblical agenda. If they're into that, and if you even get a whiff of it, if you think it's there at all, get out, run the other direction. Elisa Childers is right. She's right in not recommending Biola any longer. Sad to say. It's sad to say. But I'm at the point. I don't think I ever would have said this 10, 15 years ago. I think you're almost better off maybe not going to college at all, go to a trade school, consider an apprenticeship, or if you are going to go to college, make sure the Christian college is legitimately Christian, unapologetically so, boldly so, in your face Christian, conservative Christian, conserving the time-tested truths, the orthodoxy, ideas that have been around for 2,000 years, without apology. If you can find an institution, and I think there's a handful, and I mentioned them to you, but beyond that, I don't know anymore. And you'd almost be better off going to the state school where at least the wolves are dressed like wolves, and your kids can be prepared to defend themselves accordingly. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion.